there's a lot of good reason to grind your own meat. And one of the reasons for the demo today is I really wanted to do the basics, because a lot of people just come up and ask me about what do you put in sausage? You know, like I was said in the newsletter, some people think when they say sausage, they mean one thing. And if they're Italian, they might mean Italian sausage. For most people, they mean breakfast sausage when they say sausage generically.
Or you're German.
Right. You know, if you're Polish, kielbasa is sausage. You know, so yeah, and that's the thing is that people want to know what spices go with sausage. And it's like, well, all of them, depending on what kind you're making. I mean, it's the whole idea of sausage is to preserve meat. When you kill the hog, you can't eat the whole thing in one day, so you take the belly and you make bacon and you make sausage and you do all these other, you know, things to cure it, preserve it before refrigeration. Of course, this was important. Of course, now we're in the habit of refrigerating things that were originally designed to be shelf stable without refrigeration. But that's our overzealous health department.
So what cuts of beef or pork do you use?
The easiest thing to do, and you can get more elaborate, but the easiest thing to do is just to buy shoulder. Shoulder is going to be about 20% fat, which I would think is pretty much a minimum for a pork sausage.
I thought it was like 40%.
Well, sausages can be more than 50% fat sometimes too. So when you're thinking about like an emulsified sausage, like well, you can even something as simple as a hot dog. Sometimes the fat percentage of those is through the roof because the fat is what you're actually emulsifying to make that perfect paste, your horse meat. So they actually don't work well too lean. So let's see. For the start, so in this case, I rarely do chicken sausages because it's not a big part of the tradition. Because when you kill a chicken, you usually don't have to figure out ways to preserve the rest of it. You kill them as you need them; they're small. But you know, certainly with beef and pork, and in some cultures, lamb and goats, which are still on the small side, they still need a reason to preserve a portion of it. Sausage at its base is meat and salt. That's all. If you have meat and salt, you have sausage. Not a very interesting sausage, but if you try to remove either one of those things, you've undermined the whole thing. So, one of the things people have trouble with is the salt ratio. And really, for a fresh sausage like we're talking about today, 1.5% salt. And I'm going to say that knowing full well that people don't normally use scales in their kitchen, and every single one of these demos goes down to some rant I have to give about why get a scale for God's sakes. You can't measure salt by volume with any predictability. You can if you know your salt, but they all weigh different. Get your one, but anyhow, 1.5% salt, and you have to weigh it because the table salt that people normally use, which most people don't recommend using for this kind of stuff, weighs twice as much per volume as kosher salt. Whenever you see a recipe that says use a tablespoon of salt, if you're using, say, a diamond crystal kosher salt, that you'll be adding exactly half the quantity of salt as if you're using table salt, just because of the shape of the grain.
Have you? Well, no. There's sugar in table salt, and there's fillers.
Well, mainly it's the iodine, which tastes metallic, and then when you use it for things like this, especially if you're dry curing, it amplifies that metallic flavor. So if you taste them side by side, you know iodine was added because of goiters and thyroid issues, which are not much of an issue since we move enough food around and people get that in their diet because we're eating food that's not all local anymore.
Have you used sea salt with your sausage?
Yeah, in fact, that's what I'm using today because I don't have any kosher salt. But yeah, as long as you weigh it, it doesn't matter what kind you use. I wouldn't get fancy. I don't see there's any point to use gray salt or Himalayan pink salt or anything like that. No? You certainly could. Although, I've had some people that like to use the smoked salts in there, especially if they want something smoky and don't have a smoker. Then the challenge comes down to seasonings, and this is the part that for me, like I don't work from recipes, so I wing everything and have a pretty good idea of like how I want to put everything in. But I would say you would work in the same percentage range with seasonings as a 1.5% as a minimum. There are a lot of sausage recipes out there, and this may just be my palate, that use surprisingly small amounts of spices in them. And I've done some of these. I think Rollman, who I adore, I've done a few of his recipes, you know, verbatim, and I've always found them to come out under seasoned. Not salt wise, the salt percentage is fine. And in fact, I think he does closer to 2%, which I find to be a little salty. But the seasonings, it's like, you know, 5 pounds this thing, and you got like a half a teaspoon of this or a quarter teaspoon of that, and it's except for really pungent things like cloves. I just don't know how that, you know, would come through. I mean, even garlic, you know, like if you're using garlic powder, that just seems light to me. I don't know why, but I'm a flavor bomb guy, and people like Rollman and chefs, a lot of chef stuff have like uber palates where they're kind of people that go, you know, to drink the glass of wine and go, I detect hints of cherries. And
they're also, they don't want to offend somebody that doesn't like a lot of spice.
Well, yeah, and some of it is a little bit neutral. So I did a chicken sausage for our breakfast last year that went over really well. And somewhere there's an envelope with the recipe written on it that I can't find. And that was actually my intention. I was going to actually hand that recipe out because I thought it was, other than being, I just remember it being a little heavy on the time. So when it comes to breakfast sausage, you've got your basic flavors, which is, everybody knows sage is like a primary flavor of breakfast sausage. Black pepper, there's usually a little spice, there's usually a little garlic. I took that and went another direction with it. I put a bunch of orange peel powder, maple syrup, things like that. They'll almost always have some sweeteners, so. A lot of sausages have some sweetness, but definitely a breakfast sausage is kind of like sweet, spicy thing is what most people like. The scale doesn't read an ounce, it only reads a portion of a pound. So 1/4 ounce is there. The salt.
80 ounces of meat, 1 dry salt.
Yeah, this is chicken. We just ground this earlier. Okay, so I like using dried garlic for this stuff, and a lot of times it's mainly because fresh garlic peeling, like well, I usually do like big batches of peeling, like 1,000,000 cloves of garlic is a pain. And I have done the cheater thing and go to the restaurant store and buy the pre-peeled giant Chinese garlic before, which actually works fine. But I'm gonna say some things I'm not going to say. One of them is, for doing like a 5-pound batch, a lot of the stuff you're going to want to measure is going to be in the teaspoon to tablespoon range. So once you understand what the spices taste like, it at least gives you kind of a visual idea of where you want to go with it. It's certainly not a bad idea if you're starting out just seasoning stuff up to just find a recipe and follow it verbatim. Again, I would suggest doing a recipe that's by weight. But I'm gonna just kind of riff this so you can see the way I like grinding the pepper with that coffee grinder, because you get this absurd grind, which is like some of them are cracked in half and some of them it's really fine. And I grind pepper like this for sausage all the time because I actually like those big pieces of pepper. But I'm gonna say for breakfast sausage we're gonna bring this down a little bit more. So, but I think black pepper is an important flavor in a breakfast sausage. So I'm just gonna, somewhere in the area of like a light tablespoon. And I'm gonna do garlic the same. Now the flavor that I'm probably gonna add the most of, this is orange peel powder. This is one of the things I absolutely love with. And it's just orange flavor, but without any of the tartness. And it's also kind of a gentle flavor, so you can get away with a lot of it. And for whatever reason, the orange and the sage just work together really well. So, yeah, this is kind of on the light side of a tablespoon. The last one I did equal parts sage and thyme, but the thyme was a little overwhelming. So we're gonna do, again, it's gonna be similar quantities, but I'm gonna go light on the thyme because I didn't think the thyme should be equal sage. If you look at a lot of breakfast sausage recipes, sage will be the main herb, but there will usually be something secondary. So you'll find rosemary, you'll find parsley, you'll find thyme, all this kind of secondary ingredients.
Is there a place to find the orange?
What?
Is there a place to find the orange already ground?
Well, I sell it.
Oh.
Yeah. And then you always have something in the sweet spice category, and a lot of times it's nutmeg. Every once in a while you'll find mace. Tiny bits of clove are very common. I love, especially with the orange, this is Ceylon cinnamon. So this is true cinnamon. It's a very soft cinnamon flavor compared to the stuff we're used to eating, the Korean cinnamon, Vietnamese cinnamon, stuff that are real powerful. This is mellow, and it's good in stuff like this because it'll give a little cinnamon note, but it won't scream, oh my God, there's cinnamon in here, you know? So it's kind of a soft flavor. But I'm still gonna be a little bit light on it, so just like a teaspoon or so. And then, I usually think about a 1/4 cup per 5 pounds for sweetness, whether you're using honey, maple syrup, brown sugar, in that area. You do want to get a decent amount of sweetness, especially with the extra spice or anything. Actually, I'm going to do one more thing. This is an Asian red pepper flake. It's not like your crushed red peppers. It's got a little heat to it, but it's very sweet, very clean and sweet. And I sell it just as red pepper flakes as opposed to crushed red pepper. There's no seeds or veins in this, so you don't get any of the bitterness that you normally get in the seeds and veins. It's probably half the heat of a regular crushed red pepper, but it's so sweet that it doesn't even present itself as being that hot. But I make a blend called fire brick pepper, which I've done for myself. Didn't mean that much, by the way. Something I did for myself for steaks, which is basically this flake and black pepper. So you get the bitter heat from the black pepper and the sweet heat from this. And then one day I made a big batch and sold it, and it's been one of my best sellers ever since. But because it's only 3 ingredients, it's those things plus hickory powder, that I thought it was so stupid simple that what's the point in selling it? But I did it, and so I found that I use that pairing a lot. A lot of times when I do things, especially things that are heavy on black pepper, I'd like to pair them with this pepper flake. They just work together so well. So we're just going to add, this is just last year's maple syrup. The main thing I wanted to get across is because everybody said, so people will be a little bit fearless, and obviously if you work with spices a lot, you start getting a really good feel for where you want things. But I think that a lot of times people just don't play around enough to figure that out. And then they're afraid they're going to make something that's going to be horrible. And like I always say with spices is like, taste them. If it's a strong flavor, if you taste it's like clove and it's like a really strong flavor, then just be gentle with it naturally. And like the orange peel powdered, it's a very light flavor. Be more generous. And if you just taste things and use that as a guideline, you're probably going to fall pretty close to where you want to be. There's nothing replaces experience, of course. But it's the whole idea with this is for people to make it, to do this stuff, instead of always buying store-bought stuff full of a bunch of garbage and, make things your own. Wow. So you want to mix it. A couple of things about this is we did a fine grind on this, and you always, when you're working with sausage, not just for food safety reasons, but just to keep the texture right, is you want to work really cold. In fact, grinding meat that's practically frozen is a good way to go. Chicken is a mushy meat, and I've done very little chicken sausage. In fact, the first chicken sausage I ever did was when I did it last year for our breakfast. And that was just as I had so many people getting mad at me because they didn't eat pork or beef, and they wanted a chicken, they wanted turkey bacon, and they wanted chicken sausage. So, and I actually found out that, at least in the industrial food realm, if you go to the restaurant store, boned out, skinless chicken thigh meat is dirt cheap in the industrial world, so it's actually one of the least expensive sausages I can make too. But this is kind of a mushier texture here. But of course, it's not as cold as it probably could be. Is that ready?
Yeah, what do you
Put a little oil in there for me.
Play it. How do you make it drier? If that was really sloppy and wet, what do you add?
I don't know. I mean, you could add things. Some people, like a real common thing in sausage making in general, to use as a binder, really, is what you're asking about, is dry milk powder, boxed dry milk powder. Find there, and that's actually very common.
That's all right.
But there are a ton of actual binders that are made specifically. Yeah, just put a couple of things. Obviously, chicken isn't going to have a huge high. Now, in the real world, if you really want to taste the sausage, what you should do is have a pot of water. I do a pot of water going, but it's for washing dishes. But would be to twist it up in some saran wrap and poach it off till it's cooked through and taste it. The thing with browning it is now you've got all the browning reactions going on, so you're not going to get as clean a taste of the spices. But since you're usually going to cook a breakfast sausage by browning it like this anyhow, I think it makes sense here. But if you're going to be hanging it in a smoker or something, you might want to taste your spice balance that way. And the other important point is taste. I always take samples and taste. Don't you know, mix something up because the recipe said that's what you should do, and then make a whole batch and send it off without tasting it. Because there are too many variables, and one of the reasons I hate recipes is, and even in the spice world, is like I get tons of spices, and there are differences from batch to batch all the time. And I'm conscious of that, so I know if I'm going to make something that I use certain spices in, if I go, well, this is a really good batch of cloves. So the cloves are notorious. When I've had batches of cloves that were so clovey, and other ones that were really relatively mellow. So if I'm using clove in something, I'm always very conscious of how much I use based on what that actual batch is. And that could be said for anybody at home with spices that may have been sitting around, because we all have spices sitting around as much as we preach about fresh. If you've got that half a thing of cinnamon and it's been in there for 18 months, you're still not going to throw it away, you're going to use it. So if it's not like a ground nutmeg or something that gets a musty flavor as it gets old, if it's just something that kind of loses flavor, then, you know, use it, but be conscious of where it's at, so you might want to add a little bit more.